possibly going a bit too dark, but it's not too bad in this particular case because it's a dull day and it's quite a dark red. Now then, do the same again on this side. I have found that using a shader this way up, which is I've turned it over 180 degrees, so I'm actually using the tip more like a knife in a way, which is something I've just discovered tonight. I get an extremely fine line. It's almost like using a knife without having to get one out, which is actually quite a useful thing to learn, so I don't actually have to change over tools. Okay, that's quite dark to act like a shadow, and now just shade between them. What I've got to be careful of is that I don't end up with a vertical line here, which was a limit of my colouring when I did just this edge down here. So I just need to fade that in together like that. Now differences in the shading here don't actually make a great deal of difference, because this paintwork is actually reflecting a lot of things from around the environment, and so it actually has a lot of different shades. Now, although this is called pyrography, in actual fact I'm not actually burning the wood. What I'm actually doing here is heating the wood up, which causes the sap basically that is present in the wood to come out, and the sap is then being cooked by the heat of the tool, which is what's turning it brown. Okay, so I should be able to do now most of the main body of this, and what I want to do is, if I can manage it and get the detail in, is a little warning sign just to the side of this panel here, which I want to at least allow for if I can. It's white, so for the moment I can just leave a blank area like that. Around there. That's probably slightly the wrong shape, but it will do. what I can now do then is go ahead and basically fill in most of the front of this. Now this unfortunately is a relatively slow job, especially if I want it to be nice and smooth. Whilst I could turn the heat of this up, it is actually a lot harder to control a hot tool. You have to move a lot faster to avoid burning. Actually sort of dark rather than burning. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not actually burning the wood at this stage, although if I left the tool there long enough it would get to that stage. But it is a lot harder to control when it's hotter, and that is one of the things you've got to be guard against. Actually, is getting impatient with it and turning the heat up, and then it's very easy to wreck it. You just leave the tool in the one place just slightly too long, and you get a dark line, which is not what you want at all. And a very dark line, whilst you can erase some pyrography at some level, you can actually make it disappear altogether. So if you do make too big a mistake, then you're kind of stuck with it. And the way in which you generally erase pyrography is actually by scratching away the surface using sandpaper, something like that, a craft knife sometimes, but on some surfaces, and this is one of them, that actually stands out because the wood surface is so smooth. There's no inherent grain or anything like that in hardboard that trying to erase would actually stand out too much, so I want to avoid trying to do that. Okay. If anybody has any questions about pyrography, I'm not an expert, I am just learning this as I practice, but feel free to ask and I will try and answer them if I can. So unfortunately it's a slowish process. There are about 3 different techniques actually for colouring the wood. There's one which basically is a relatively cool tool, which is what I've got here, and you pass it over the wood multiple times, and as you do so the wood gets a slightly darker colour each time. And I'm not sure whether it'll actually be showing up on camera, but that's what's happening here. You can turn the heat up on the tool a great deal, and some people even go as far as the tool is actually glowing, but then what you have to do is move the tool very, very fast. It's very hard to get a consistent colour. It takes a lot of practice. There are people that do it. I have tried that. It's not my most successful technique. And the other one is actually to keep a fairly cool tool or a medium heat tool and actually just move it a lot slower, and that will, because you're moving a lot slower, the wood heats up more. Now the problem with doing that is you can end up with dots if you move the tool too slowly, and even here, and I'm moving this fairly quickly, I'm getting lines which I'm trying to fade out, because I want to try and get a fairly even colour all the way across here, and then afterwards, because this is got lots of reflections in it, I can then darken it down where I want to show those variations because of the reflections. It's a lot easier to make something darker, as I say, than it is to lighten it. Erasing is sort of possible, but it's not necessarily all that successful, depending on the wood and how dark it is and how light you want to go. As I've mentioned earlier as well, this is a new tool to me. It's one I've only just got, and so I'm not that familiar with its characteristics and what I can actually do and can't do with it, how fast it works, etc. So it's one reason for doing the practice now on this particular piece, and also why I'm taking it slowly. Whilst I don't mind if I do mess up this piece, it's not something I want to do if I can avoid it. One of the difficulties you've got with using tools, especially large tools like this, which is a relatively large surface area, is that as soon as you put the tool down on the wood, it starts to cool. So it heats up. As I lift it off, it heats up, and as I put it down, it cools off, which means you start the stroke a lot darker than you end it usually, and that happens to all machines. So basically machines that can supply more current to the tip will actually try and keep it hotter more. It would certainly probably be better with a temperature control tip, but I haven't really come across any things like that except what is effectively converted soldering irons. But most of those don't have the same range of tips. They work with a different set of tips, which of course are more suited to being fitted to a soldering iron. The other problem with those is there's a lot of thermal mass in them, which even this, which hasn't got a lot, can quite easily burn, as you might just see there. I've got a darker spot than I actually wanted. And if you can imagine something with a lot more metal on the end, that would be a bigger problem and harder to control. Okay, quite clearly this is too light compared with that, so I'm going to need to darken it down. A lot more. It's very easy to lose, when you're doing fairly large pieces, to lose consistency across a piece from edge to edge, which is kind of what I've done here. I've lost that consistency now. Got to remember that's a shadow, so I don't want to go as dark as that shadow, but I do need to come darker. And I've already started to darken the wood too much, so I'm going to be a little bit careful around here, just to fade in and smooth out the dark area, and actually not to leave a light edge. So if I build off of this and go backwards, I can lighten it somewhat. One of the things I found with the shader is I can actually do what I'm doing now, which is run it in circles. As I mentioned earlier, what I'm actually doing is burning or cooking the sap, and doing this running in circles acts as a kind of blender. It seems to move it around and actually allows a smoother edge. I don't get lines and edges as much, which has proved an interesting discovery on this tool. Turn it up a little bit. If you want to ask any questions, please do so. I can try and answer them. What I'm going to try and do here is try and arrange the shading of this so that I lose a little bit of that dark patch I accidentally created there. Which to some extent is the only way in which you can adjust pyrography. If you make something darker than you intend it to, and effectively the only way of correcting that without attempting to erase it is to make the rest of the picture darker as well, take everything down that extra bit of a shade. Which if it's a large piece could be annoying, but then you can actually use a trick in that your eye, as you go along something like even as long as this for example, you actually don't see the difference in shading over the length of just sort of a slight shade difference. It's only when they're fairly close to each other like this that you actually see a major change in the shade. And again, I've got to smooth that out. So the whole of this side is going to be sort of around this sort of shade when I've actually finished. Fortunately, hardboard is quite a difficult material to work with. It doesn't have a great deal of sap, being a constructed wood. It does have a lot of glue in it, of course. And what seems to happen with it is you get an initial burn, but then it becomes a lot harder to actually change the colour once you've moved away from the area. It still does work, but it just takes a bit more time and effort. As you can probably see now, this is actually going darker, but it's taking a lot longer than it would on a natural piece of wood. Just trying to move a little bit slower now just to see if I can darken it a bit quicker. Now that does work, but the problem I've got to do is make sure I apply that consistently now and get that same shade throughout the local area. things I have to be careful of is similar actually to airbrush painting, and that is not to stop on the workpiece. Don't stop moving the tip on the workpiece. If I do that, I will get a dark spot. So what I'm actually doing is lifting off before I stop moving to reverse the direction, and I'm moving before I put it down onto the work when I start the stroke again. What that does is stops me getting that dark spot at the start and end of each stroke. But it does also means that you've got to be careful of is not to start the stroke in the same place each time, because otherwise again you're just darkening a particular area, when what you actually want to do is darken the whole length of the stroke. It's a lot of blending. Yeah, and even with keeping the tip moving, I'm still getting dots here at the start on the left. I am though moving the tip fairly slowly, trying to get this wood to darken. Could apply a lot more heat, which would do that, but then I lose the control because I'm not that good at moving this very fast. Now I do need to bring the bottom of this dark enough to at least start to look like it's a similar sort of shade to that dark line just underneath where my tool is, because in practice they are the same colour, except there's a slight lip between the two which gives an edge, so I don't mind them being exactly not the same. In any case, it's me that's doing this, and I don't have to match real life perfectly. It's getting closer. Give the area a rest and come back to it. Again, keep mentioning, but if anybody's got any particular questions they'd like answering, then by all means ask, and I'll see if I can do that. Do a bit more around here. These are actually grab rails on a real locomotive, as this is a doorway. And I can get away with some mistakes like that dark patch I've just created there, because this is a very shiny surface, so it's reflecting a lot of the surface, the environment, in different shades of colour. So the fact that there is marks like that isn't inconsistent with the reference images that I'm using. Which in this particular case is rather convenient, because I would not like to want to darken the whole image just to take account of the fact that I've made a mistake there. I can do it and mitigate it a little bit by darkening just around it. I don't want to go too dark though, because this area below is actually quite extremely dark, and I do want to put a little bit of detail into that dark area, so I need to allow myself some differences in shade to make this really really dark, but allow enough darkness to put the odd bit of detail in there. Particular area of this wood is not taking colour very well. And I'm being a bit wary of leaving the tool on the surface too long. Up until now, for this sort of work, I've been using a spoon shader, but I have been quite pleasantly surprised just how smooth a colour I'm getting with using this flat shader. It's taking more work to do than potentially the spoon shader would, but the spoon shader, it does it in kind of like little rows.